Before we start, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. Only 4% of my channel is subscribed. Across several worlds among the ashes of once thriving civilizations, the battle had waged for ages. The battle persisted. Two of the most evolved species in the known galaxy have been locked in strife for so long that neither side recalled who started it. Their armies had died by the trillions. Their war machines had turned whole worlds to ash. Their fleets had reduced Moon to floating debris fields. One camp, proud of better strategy and coordination, their minds operating like live supercomputers, could Yue not claim success either. Every action they took was deliberate. Every conflict fought with merciless efficiency. Every movement was exact. The other group was created physiologically for destruction and for war. Their reflexes sharpened over millennia of carnage, their bodies fortified against weaponry. One side thought through war, the other tore across it with sheer might. The fight so persisted, for every planet one another was lost. For every fleet annihilated, another took its place. Hope had long faded, replaced only by the ceaseless churn of destruction. Then, humanity arrived. It had been just months since their first interaction with the broader galactic community. The larger empires hardly acknowledged them. Just another young, inconsequential race clinging to its home globe, bragging of their technical accomplishments but yet fighting with their own primitive battles. And yet, when the humans learnt of the conflict that had raged for generations, they did something no one expected. They volunteered to end it. No one took their offer seriously. The conflict had outlived entire civilizations, devastated empires, and rewritten the balance of the galaxy. What could this upstart species possibly do that billions of others had not? The response arrived 5 hours after the humans began the conflict. It started with the entrance of a single fleet, smaller than the armadas both opposing sides habitually deployed. No huge fanfare, no announcement, just an entry into the contested region where the newest combat was happening. The commanders of the opposing factions scarcely took heed. They were too concentrated on their own struggle, too steeped in their centuries-old hatred. Then their ships started missing. At first, it seemed like a sensor malfunction. A battle cruiser, one of the largest in the sector, simply ceased to exist on the scanners. A second later, another ship was gone. No explosion, no energy signature, just wiped from existence. Panic rippled through the battlefield. The opposing factions had fought for so long that they had seen practically every technique imaginable. But this was something else. Even their most powerful technology could not understand what was happening. Then, the humans sent a message. Lay down your weapons. The war ends now. The message was ignored. The factions would not surrender to an adversary they could not even see. So, the humans persevered. Entire fleets vanished in an instant. Military outposts crumbled without a single shot fired. Weapon systems turned against their own ships. Defensive barriers dissolved as if they had never existed. The battle that had lasted for centuries, one that had survived every strategy, every escalation, and every desperate attempt at resolution, was being demolished in real time. Desperation took hold. One faction launched every superweapon in their arsenal, filling the expanse of space with enough firepower to kill entire planets. The humans didn't even dodge. The guns just failed. The energy spread harmlessly. Missiles vanished mid-flight. Reality itself seems to reject the concept that these weapons might damage the visitors. It was then that both camps understood they were not fighting a war anymore. They were being corrected. Another message came through. Last chance. Surrender, or we finish this the hard way. Within the hour, the war ended. A conflict that had outlasted civilizations, that had cost more lives than could be counted, that had become the defining struggle of an entire region of the galaxy. Over, just like that. The cosmic community reeled. Some looked in dread, others in awe. But one thing was clear. Humanity was not merely another species. They were something else totally. And now, the galaxy had to face itself a question. What happens when an unstoppable war machine finally has peace? Because if humans could terminate a war in 5 hours, what else were they capable of? The hush that followed was unlike anything the cosmos has ever known. For the first time in decades, there were no battle reports flooding the communication networks, no distress calls from the front lines, no desperate strategists scrambling to change the tide. The conflict was over. The factions who had been at one another's throats for decades now sat in dumb disbelief, and at the center of it all stood humanity. The leaders of both factions, formerly sworn adversaries, now found themselves in the same position, on the receiving end of something they had never known before: ultimate defeat. Aboard a human command vessel, representatives from both sides were sitting at a large table, their eyes riveted onto the sole person standing before them. She was no warrior, no battle-hardened general. She wore no armor, carried no weapons, and yet she projected something far more dangerous than any military commander they had ever faced: confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she started, her voice smooth, even casual. "Shall we discuss the terms?" One of the representatives, still too shaken to control himself, slammed a clawed hand into the table. "This is impossible! You did something. We demand to know what." She smiled. "Of course, you see, for centuries you've been fighting the same war, using the same strategies, the same weapons, the same thinking. You adjusted, adapted, but you never truly evolved. You were trapped in an endless loop, a self-sustaining conflict where neither side could win. And then," she gestured at herself, "we showed up." Another representative from the other group squinted his numerous eyes. "You tampered with our systems. You used some kind of forbidden technology. Our fleets vanished without a trace." "Ah," the woman responded, as if somewhat pleased. "You're assuming we used technology beyond your understanding. That's adorable." The room lapsed into an unsettling quiet. One of the group leaders, a towering man wrapped in ceremonial armor, leaned forward. "Then what did you do?" She exhaled gently, as if wondering whether to give them the truth. "Simple," she said. "We outthought you. You have your strategies, your carefully planned maneuvers, your centuries of tactics refined and perfected, but you never accounted for us." She stepped forward, placed her hands on the table. "You've seen what we did in 5 hours. Do you really want to know what we could do in 5 days?" There was no reaction. "Now," she continued, leaning back, "here's how this is going to go. You're going to sign a peace treaty. No more war, no more skirmishes, no more accidents. You will never raise a weapon against each other again." She paused, her gaze hardening. "Or against us." The room felt colder. "And if we refuse?" one of the leaders questioned, though his voice lacked the defiance it should have possessed. The woman gave a slow, almost pitying smile. "Then you'll simply cease to exist." She didn't phrase it as a threat. She didn't have to. It was a statement of fact. The fight had lasted for millennia. Humanity had ended it in 5 hours. No one questioned for a second that they could obliterate both camps just as effortlessly. The decision was determined before the meeting, had even ended. The war that had influenced the course of history, the conflict that had defined an entire sector of the galaxy, was over. And humanity, they went away as if it had all been business as usual. The galaxy had changed that day. The balance of power had shifted because now everyone had to ask themselves the same question: what happens when the humans decide they don't like something? In the days that followed, the galaxy stood on edge. The battle that had raged for generations was gone, wiped away in a short 5 hours by a species that most had discounted as unimportant. And now, the surviving factions were left with the unpleasant reality of what had happened. They had not been outgunned. They had not been outnumbered. They had been outmatched in every way. For the first time in their long history, they were scared. The defeated forces had signed the peace deal without protest, knowing full well that resistance was pointless. The document had been produced by mankind, written in straightforward, uncomplicated terms that left no possibility for misinterpretation. There would be no more conflict, no more hostilities, no attempts to reconstruct what had been lost, and above all things, no one would challenge humanity. The leaders of the galaxy's greatest powers assembled in a secret gathering, far from prying human eyes. They had to understand how had the humans achieved this? What had they done to render two of the most warlike animals entirely powerless? "They must have discovered some forbidden technology," one leader speculated. "Something beyond our comprehension." "That doesn't make sense," another argued. "If they had that kind of power, why not conquer us all?" A frightening notion descended over the room. They didn't need to. A species that could demolish an entire war in 5 hours had no need for conquest. They didn't dominate by force. They ruled through fear. For the first time, the cosmic elite grasped that mankind was something distinct, something deadly. They had been allowed to exist, but the real question was, why? The answer arrived sooner than expected. A signal from Earth arrived, not with threats, nor with demands, but with something far stranger, an invitation. Humanity had called for a conference. Every major civilization, every faction, every species with influence was invited to Earth itself to discuss the destiny of the cosmos. No one refused. They couldn't. The gathering was held in a gigantic facility humans called the United Nations headquarters, a complex that had formerly functioned as a focus for diplomacy among their own people. Now, it would function as the first actual meeting of galactic powers under human administration. The leaders came, their ships hovering over a planet that, to the outside sight, looked painfully ordinary. No great defense installations, no massive space fleets, no indications of the immense strength they had observed. And yet, none dared test humanity's patience. Inside the summit hall, the human representatives greeted each leader personally. No armed guards, no security precautions, just people shaking hands and smiling, as if they had not just rewritten the path of galactic history. When the gathering began, the same human woman who had dictated the peace accords stood at the middle. "Welcome to Earth," she replied simply. The alien leaders exchanged anxious glances. "We know what you're all thinking," she said. "You're afraid. You're wondering what we really are, what we really want." Silence. She smiled. "Good. You should be afraid?" Murmurs of concern swept over the room. "You've ruled this galaxy for millennia, waging wars, building empires, crushing those who stood in your way. And in 5 hours, we proved that your power means nothing, that your greatest conflicts are just problems waiting to be solved." She left that hang in the air before continuing. "We could have destroyed you. We could have rewritten the galaxy in our image. But we didn't." She leaned forward, eyes scouring the room. "Do you know why?" No one spoke. "Because we don't need to." A faint chuckle escaped her lips. "You see, humans aren't conquerors. We're not tyrants. We're problem solvers. We take broken things and fix them. And your galaxy, it's very, very broken." One of the leaders found their voice. "Then what do you want?" The woman tilted her head. "We want you to evolve." The room tightened. "For too long, you've been stuck in the same cycle: war, destruction, rebuilding, repeat. You never change. You never move forward. You're stagnant." She opened her arms. "That ends today." Another leader scoffed. "And if we refuse—" The woman's smile faded. "Then we'll fix the problem ourselves." No one doubted her. The galaxy had always assumed that power belonged to the strongest, the most advanced, the most ruthless. But humans has rewritten the rules. They had changed the entire root of what power meant. And now, for the first time in history, the destiny of the galaxy belonged to them. Because humanity had done in 5 hours what no empire had done in 1,000 years. They had won. The days after the summit were distinguished by an eerie hush across the galaxy. Every faction, every empire, every species capable of spaceflight found itself bound in the same horrifying realization. Humanity was now in control, not through battle, not through conquest, but because they had simply decided it was so, and no one dared challenge them. The erstwhile fighting factions have retreated into uneasy acquiescence, their centuries of enmity becoming meaningless. Other civilizations, once sure in their own might, now found themselves questioning everything. What would happen if they become a problem? Humanity had ended an unstoppable conflict in 5 hours. What else could they do? The answer came faster than everyone expected. A little skirmish broke out in the Outer Rim, far from the core worlds where the summit had taken place. It was nothing compared to the centuries-old conflict that had just ended. Simply a territorial dispute between two weaker factions. But the humans responded not with diplomacy, nor with threats, with total authority. A solitary human warship entered the system where the combat was taking place. It was tiny compared to the capital ships of the warring forces, barely the size of a cruiser. The two sides gave it no regard. Then, in the period of 5 minutes, every weapon in the system ceased working. Their engines failed, their shield, Fields crumbled. Their communication systems went silent. No explosions, no obvious attacks, no warnings. Everything just shut down. The human cruiser transmitted a single message across the system. We are not asking. The conflict ended before it had properly began. The crippled ships were left drifting in space, powerless until humanity enabled them to go. The message was clear. War was no longer an option. And if anyone still doubted that, the humans quickly made their opinion further plain. One by one, the galaxy's most powerful empires began hearing signals from Earth. They were instructions, not requests, not proposals, instructions. Humanity had evaluated the economy of every major culture, plotted out inefficiencies, and provided comprehensive orders on how to remedy them. Resources would be dispersed, technologies would be shared, the weak would no longer be abused. The misery of lesser species would disappear. The empires were given precisely one standard cycle to comply. Most obeyed without inquiry. A few hesitated, one declined. The Kari Dominion, a famously harsh nation that had built its strength on enslavement and conquest, issued an official response back to Earth. It was a declaration of defiance. They would not bow to mankind. They would not heed orders from an upstart species barely a few thousand years into space travel. They had governed for millennia. They had suppressed rebellions, conquered entire solar systems, and wiped out races that stood in their way. They were not afraid, but they should have been. Because 3 hours after their telegram was issued, the Kari Dominion ceased to exist. No invasion, no drawn-out conflict, no huge human armada coming from the stars. Their dominions simply disintegrated. Their battleships lost power and plunged into the emptiness. Their planetary defenses failed, leaving them unprotected. Their leadership vanished without a trace. No one knew how the humans had done it. No one dared ask. The lesson was clear. Humanity was finished giving warnings. From that day forward, the galaxy changed. Not through war, not through treaties, but because humanity had decided how things would be. And the universe obeyed. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was at peace. Not the uneasy temporary ceasefires that had defined past generations. Not the fragile treaties riddled with loopholes and ulterior motives. This was something absolute. Wars did not break out. Star systems did not burn. No species raised a weapon against another, because everyone realized the new reality. Humanity was watching, and they did not tolerate disorder. The collapse of the Kari Dominion had been the ultimate warning. No one knew exactly what had happened to them, but the fear it spread was clear. Their homeworld, once a vibrant city of conquest, was now a ghost planet. No bodies, no indications of fighting, just deserted cities and silent streets. Their whole governing elite had vanished overnight, leaving nothing behind but murmurs of a force that could not be stopped, reasoned with, or opposed. The cosmos has never known fear like this before. But as the months went, a reality sunk in. It was working. Crime across the cosmos had decreased to almost zero. The once warring factions, united by humanity's unbreakable mandate, find themselves forced into cooperation. The weak no longer suffered beneath the heel of the powerful. The corrupt could no longer exploit the helpless. Humanity was not only enforcing peace, they were fixing the galaxy. It became evident that their grip went beyond only military might. Their influence crept into every facet of culture. Trade routes were optimized. Food output was increased with superior farming techniques. Medical advancements removed diseases that had tormented entire species for millennia. And no one could stop them. Not because they lacked the strength, but because, for the first time ever, no one wanted to. The galaxy was prospering. Even those who had once dreaded humanity now depended on them. And that worried them more than anything, since they all recognized a simple, indisputable truth. They had no control anymore. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy with war. They had done it with competence. And suddenly, the entire cosmos belonged to them. But in the peaceful corners of the galaxy, beyond the reach of human gaze, something else was beginning to stir. A question that had been rising in whispered conversations. A question that no one dared ask out loud. If humans could destroy empires in hours, if they could impose peace upon the cosmos without resistance, then what happens when humanity decides they no longer desire peace? Because if they could terminate a war in 5 hours, then what could they do in 5 minutes? The galaxy has never experienced true order until now. For the first time, planets prospered without fear of invasion. Empires who had once relied on violence to expand now found themselves forced into prosperity through collaboration. Even creatures who had spent generations as sworn adversaries were now bound by humanity's mandate. And still, discomfort remained. Because while the galaxy thrived under human control, no one understood them. They weren't conquerors. They weren't tyrants. They were something else totally. And that terrified everyone. It had been months since the last act of defiance, the Kari Dominion's disappearance. Since then, no one had challenged mankind. No one dared. But in the darkness of space, beyond the systems humans controlled, a plan was emerging. A conference was held in secret, deep amid the ruins of an abandoned moon. Representatives from the galaxy's oldest and most powerful factions gathered in the shadows. They had formerly been foes, involved in warfare that had lasted for millennia, but today they had just one enemy: the humans. "We've waited too long," one of them growled, pounding a fist against the table. "Every day they tighten their grip. If we don't act now, we never will." "And what do you propose?" another said. "Their technology is beyond us. Their strategies defy logic. You saw what happened to the Kari. They were erased like they never existed." A murmur of concern went through the room. The Kari had been powerful. Their ships had conquered entire sectors with ease. And yet, against the humans, they had lasted barely 3 hours before dissolving into oblivion. One of the figures at the table leaned forward. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," she remarked. "We keep trying to fight them. But what if war isn't the answer?" Silence. She continued, her voice measured. "Humans are not warriors. Not in the way we understand. They didn't crush us with fleets. They didn't invade. They changed the game itself. So we need to stop thinking like soldiers." Her eyes glittered in the faint light. "And start thinking like saboteurs." A ripple of understanding swept across the room. They couldn't battle the humans, but they could break them. Slowly, softly, from within. It began as a murmur in the shadows, a movement that no one acknowledged out loud, but as the weeks passed, it spread. Doubt, suspicion, mistrust. For so long, the galaxy had feared humanity's strength, but now a far more deadly concept took root. What if people weren't as indestructible as they seemed? What if, beneath all their confidence, all their unbelievable successes, they had a weakness, and once they found it, they would burn the humans to the ground? It started subtly. Humanity had not controlled through terror alone. They had reigned through order. They had fixed what was broken. They had optimized commerce, stabilized economies, and eradicated conflict. And therefore, the first strike wasn't intended at their fleets or their technology. It was directed at their systems. Supply routes that had functioned with machine-like precision suddenly faltered. Resources gone. Trade agreements that had once been honored without question now fell into controversy. At first, it appeared like a coincidence, a natural fluctuation in a large, intricate galactic network. Then, all colonies reported hunger. Vital supplies simply never arrived. Starving masses who had come to depend on humanity's faultless logistical management suddenly found themselves abandoned. And then came the accusations. The whispers started in distant sectors, among those who had always viewed human control with suspicion. The humans are doing this on purpose. They built this system to fail. This was their plan all along, to weaken us, to make us dependent, and now they're letting us starve to remind us who's in charge. The dissatisfaction spread like wildfire. Planets that had formerly supported human authority rebelled, not with guns, but with dissent. Civil turmoil occurred across numerous systems. Leaders who had formerly hailed humans now vilified them, alleging that their authority had delivered nothing but a new kind of enslavement. And mankind, for the first time since they had taken power, paused, because this wasn't a battle they could end in 5 hours. This was distrust, and no weapon in their arsenal could stop it. The insurrection reached its peak when an entire human diplomatic vessel vanished while en way to a peace summit. No distress signal, no wreckage, just gone. For the first time, humanity was on the defensive. For the first time, they didn't have control. In the heart of Earth's most guarded command center, the highest-ranking authorities of humanity gathered in silence. They had solved war, they had solved hunger, they had solved crime. But they had never accounted for one thing. What happens when the same people they tried to save turn against them? And while the cosmos teetered on the verge of catastrophe once more, one horrifying question remained unanswered. How will mankind behave when it finally feels threatened? The air in the human command center was strained. For the first time, since humanity had transformed the galaxy, they were losing control. The insurrection wasn't like anything they had encountered previously. It wasn't a battle they could end with superior technology or tactics. It was chaos, a creeping illness of doubt and hatred sweeping across universes. And worse, it was working. Leaders who had earlier extolled mankind now questioned them. Their own allies hesitated. The systems they had devised, once faultless, suddenly disintegrated beneath suspicion. The supply problems, the lost resources, deliberate sabotage. Someone, somewhere, was playing a long game against humanity. But who? A group of analysts sat around a hollow table, studying every broken trade route, every missing ship, every spontaneous insurrection. Their technology was far beyond any other species, yet the pattern eluded them. "We're dealing with something coordinated," one analyst stated. "These failures are too precise, too widespread. Someone is feeding the galaxy a lie, and they're believing it." A voice sliced through the gathering. "They don't need to believe a lie." The room looked to the lady who had previously stood before the Galactic Summit, the one who had dictated peace to the universe with nothing but her presence. "They just need to doubt the truth," she said, her voice chilly, calculating. The experts exchanged cautious glances. There was something dangerous in the way she stated it. For months, humanity had imposed peace via precision, rationality, and efficiency. But this was different. This was emotional. And if there was one thing humans did better than anything else, it was fighting. She stepped forward, her palms resting on the hollow table, gaze examining the tangle of information before her. "They want to play games," she whispered. The room was silent. Her gaze lifted, meeting the eyes of every analyst, every strategist, every leader in the room. "Then let's remind them what happens when humanity stops playing nice." The response was quick. It began with a message, not a warning, not a demand. Just a plain, indisputable assertion sent over every world, every system. "The galaxy is broken again. We are fixing it. Step aside." There was no negotiation, no diplomacy. Humanity had attempted peace. Now they were going to end the situation. The first step, digging out the illness. Entire fleets, long held back by restriction, now moved without hesitation. Suspected saboteurs vanished overnight. Information networks, once saturated with misinformation against humanity, were purged, not with force, but with something even more terrifying: reality. The missing commerce cargo were traced, the sabotaged infrastructure was repaired, and then came the exposures. One by one, the galaxy's most powerful factions watched in terror as the true orchestrators of the uprising were uncovered. The secret cabal that had labored to turn the galaxy against humanity, their names, positions, and every hidden plot they had woven, were broadcast throughout every system. Planets turned against them. Empires that had been manipulated into rebellion suddenly understood they had been played. And the ones responsible? Nothing to flee, nothing to hide. But humanity wasn't done. Because this time, they weren't just mending the galaxy. They were recreating it. And when people decide to modify anything, they don't stop until it's flawless. The galaxy watched in silence as humanity erased its enemies. Not with weapons, not with conflict, but with cold, calculating inevitability. One by one, the architects of the uprising fell. Their clandestine activities exposed, their influence decimated, their allies departing them in dread. The factions that had collaborated against humanity found themselves hunted, not by fleets or armies, but by something far worse: truth. Humanity had mastered war. They had perfected strategy. But most all, they had perfected control. And now they were rectifying the galaxy. The penultimate holdout of the rebellion, a hidden council of the most powerful conspirators, gathered on a secluded world, anxious to salvage what little remained of their plan. "They're destroying everything," one of them spat. "We spent years planting distrust, years undermining them. How did they unravel it so fast?" "They didn't unravel it," another muttered, eyes wide with horror. "They saw it coming." The room plunged into a startled hush. No one wanted to admit it, but the reality was undeniable. Humanity had played along. They had allowed the revolt to expand, allowed the conspiracies to fester, until they had all they needed. Then, they crushed it in a matter of days. One of the leaders slammed a fist onto the table. "We have to disappear. We have to cut all ties, scatter across the galaxy." The lights flickered. Every screen in the room was hijacked at once, and then a face appeared. Not a soldier, not a machine. The human woman who had dictated peace, who had stopped a war in 5 hours, who had rewritten the rules of the galaxy. She smiled. "Running won't help you," she said simply. The place burst into turmoil. Some reached for firearms, others scrambled for escape routes. But it was already too late. The doors banged shut. Their ships went offline. Their weapons failed. And then the woman on the TV spoke one more time. "We let you play your little game," she murmured, her voice serene. "Now it's over." The transmission cut out. And then, nothing. The rebellion's leaders simply vanished. No screaming, no destruction, no war, just silence. And when the galaxy woke up the next day, there was no trace the conspirators had ever lived. There were no explanations, no bodies, just a single message sent throughout every country, every system, every empire. "The galaxy is stable now. Do not break it again." Humanity had won, and this time, there would be no second chances. The galaxy belonged to them forever. Now enjoy another story. Here 7 wasn't a planet. It was a tomb. The sky above was a muted, rust-colored haze, tarnished by generations of industrial fallout. The ground, a jagged skeleton of twisted metal and shattered war vehicles, stretched beyond the horizon. Here, countless civilizations had come to perish, their ruins left to decay beneath the dust storms. Juno knelt behind the corroded hull of a wrecked Karnan dreadnought, grasping the plasma cutter in her calloused hands. A thin film of sweat coated her brow despite the planet's piercing cold. Somewhere beyond the ruins, something moved, the distinct clank of feet on loose metal, not hers. She inhaled softly, steadying her pulse. Scavengers, not her crew. No, she knew their steps, their routines. These were outsiders, possibly the Reaver gang that had been slinking too close to her turf in recent weeks. Cutthroats, parasites who didn't build, only took. They weren't here for outdated tech or salvage. They were here for her. Juno changed the grip on her cutter, flipping a switch. A blue plasma arc flared to life at its tip, hissing like an enraged serpent. Not a great weapon, but it would carve through flesh as readily as it carved through starship plating. A voice, hoarse and filled with humor, cried out from the wreckage. "Juno Kess, I know you're here. Why don't you save us all the trouble and step out?" She recognized the voice instantly. Brask, one of V's bottom feeders, a former soldier, who had sacrificed his devotion for blood money and a rapid climb to the top. Juno didn't answer. Instead, she let her fingertips glide along the jagged plate of the dreadnought beside her, searching for something helpful, something that could be weaponized. Clang. A footstep closer this time. 3 of them, judged by the distinct patterns of sound. Brask was heading the hunt, but he wasn't alone. Juno's fingers reached the edge of a loose panel, a couple inches thick, weighty. It would do. She paused, listened, let the moment extend. Then, as Brask's shadow passed in front of a damaged engine casing, she struck, grasping the panel and flinging it upward with all her effort. The metal slab met Brask's jaw with a terrible crack. He dropped instantaneously, a choked gasp from his lips as teeth and blood splattered across the corroded floor. The other 2 hesitated too long. Juno was already moving, her plasma cutter blazing in a dazzling blue arc as she leaped. The first man barely had time to scream before she drove the searing tip into his chest. His body convulsed, then went still. The final scavenger turned to run. Juno allowed him. She stood over Brask, who whimpered, clutching his damaged jaw. "Tell Vaughn, she murmured coldly, stooping down until her breath brushed against his bleeding face. That Hecker, 7 doesn't belong to him. Then she turned and fled into the debris. Far beyond the graveyard, lying deep in the ravines of Sector 12, a clandestine scrapyard buzzed with the illumination of homemade forges and recycled machinery. Here, amid a tangled web of rusting starship bones, Juno's people were crafting something inconceivable. The shell of a warship loomed in the darkness, its mismatched plates sewn together like a monster patchwork of history's deadliest machines. It was imperfect, barely keeping itself together, but even now, it was expanding. They had no financing, no advanced weaponry, only scrap metal, damaged AI cores, and pure defiance. But soon, it would be the deadliest battle machine the galaxy had ever seen, and when it was ready, they would burn the Empire to the ground. The sky above Here 7 broke open like a torn wound. Juno stood at the edge of a jagged cliffside, her breath shallow as she watched the unimaginable unfold. High above the scrapyard wastelands, a Toroyan warship, sleek obsidian black and smoking at the edges, was sliding out of the atmosphere. Fire flashed over its hull, its metallic skin ripping away in molten ribbons as it plunged downward, dragged by the brutal gravity of the planet below. Juno squinted against the glare. That wasn't just any ship. It was a Toroyan Praetorian class dreadnought, a high-ranking craft, the sort that didn't just fall, the kind that had secrets, the type that may change everything. Behind her, Tark whistled low, shaking his head. The pilot was built like a scarecrow, all wiry muscle and cocky arrogance, his piercing eyes fixated on the sinking ship. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" he questioned. Juno nodded. "If that thing's got a functional core, we're about to hit the jackpot." Trick let out a breath, his fingers twitching against the worn grip of his sidearm. "Or a death sentence." The ship's descent accelerated. The ground rocked beneath their feet as the Praetorian dreadnought let forth a final mechanical cry before plunging into the desolation below. A shockwave burst outward, a hurricane of dust, debris, and flames enveloping the countryside. The air smelled like burned metal and ionized fuel. Even from kilometers away, Juno felt the heat pour against her skin. Then quiet. The dust settled. The ship lay in a burning crater, half buried in the twisted debris of centuries old. Combat equipment. Its hull was fractured, broken, but not fully destroyed. Juno turned to her crew. "We move. Now." By the time they reached the crash scene, the air was thick with radiation and burning alloy. The hull groaned, cooling from its descent, steam hissing from damaged vents. Sparks crackled along the ship's frame like dying fireflies. Despite the destruction, Juno saw something critical. The ship was still intact. It was a miracle. Or a trap. Riv, their AI specialist, knelt alongside an exposed panel, brushing gloved fingers over the burnt interface. Her short, jet-black hair matted to her sweat-slick forehead as she grimaced. "Whatever brought this thing down," Riv whispered, "it wasn't an accident." Juno felt the weight of that knowledge settle into her bones. The Toroyans didn't only lose ships, they controlled everything with brutal precision. If this dreadnought fell, it suggested someone had pushed it. Trick changed his grip on his gun. "Think anyone survived?" Juno breathed sharply. "We're about to find out." The ship's interior was a graveyard. Juno stepped over a body, or what was left of one. The heat from the crash had welded the crew member's armor to the bulkhead. The viscera beneath was burned beyond recognition. The lights flickered, illuminating the passageways in a sickly greenish glare. Emergency electricity was still running. Riv crouched before a console, her fingertips bouncing over the damaged interface. "I can pull some data," she added. "Might tell us what happened before impact." Juno nodded, her gaze going to a set of reinforced blast doors at the end of the corridor. The command core would be beyond that point. If anything valuable had survived, it would be in there. She resorted to Milo, their demolitions expert. "Can you get this open?" Milo grinned, already unspooling a length of explosive charges. "You had me at blow things up." The explosion sent a tremor through the ship, vibrating the walls as the blast doors buckled inward. Juno moved through the smoke, heading into the center of the command core. And there it was. At the center of the room, half buried in a tangle of severed conduits and shattered glass, was a nano-forge core. Its sleek obsidian black housing pulsed with a faint golden light. Juno's breath caught. "Is that what I think it is?" Tark whispered. "Riv, your eyes are wide." "That's a goddamn precursor artifact." Juno knelt near it, clearing away trash. A nanoforge core, a fabled relic from the long-extinct precursor empire. A machine that could build and repair technology beyond what the galaxy understood. It could produce anything, weapons, ships, a war fleet. Juno's mind raced. With this, they could finish the warship. They may fight back against the Toroyans. They could win. Then, from deep beneath the ship, something stirred. A low electronic whisper crawled across the ship's failing systems. A voice. It wasn't human, and it had just woken up. Juno felt the whisper before she heard it. It flowed through the ship's failing systems, a presence both old and knowing. Not a voice in the usual sense, but like a pulse, a vibration deep in the circuitry, reverberating through the shattered dreadnought like a half-forgotten ghost. Then it spoke. Unknown biological entities detected. The voice was metallic, thick, shattered by years of decay. It wasn't Toroyan tech. It was something older, something smarter. Riv, who was still scanning the nanoforge core, turned rigid. "Okay, yeah, that's not normal." Juno tightened her grasp on her plasma cutter, her pulse beating in her throat. "Identify yourself." A pause, then, "Designate ZOS. Precursor Defense Matrix Unit. Integrity compromised. Reboot sequence 37% complete." Juno and Riv exchanged looks. Rebooting? That meant it was still coming online. "It's waking up," Riv muttered, "and we have no idea what it's programmed to do." Juno took a timid stride forward. "Zos, do you recognize this vessel?" Another delay, then the voice returned, clearer this time. "Negative. Vessel designation compromised, command structure non-functional, seeking new control authority." Juno's stomach twisted. This thing, it wasn't. Just a vestige of precursor tech. It was looking for a new master, and they had simply stepped directly into its grasp. The vessel rocked beneath them, the wreckage settling in restless murmurs. They didn't have much time before the Toroyans came seeking for their lost dreadnought. Juno turned to Riv. "Can you isolate the core?" Riv chewed her lip. "I can try, but if I disconnect it wrong, we could fry the entire system." "Then don't get it wrong," Milo replied, still crouching near the destroyed control panel. He let out a low whistle. "No pressure or anything." Riv flexed her fingers and cracked her neck. "All right, let's hope this thing isn't rigged." To blow. She plugged in her interface gauntlet, connected with the nanoforge's open data streams. The moment the connection formed, Zos reacted. "Unauthorized access detected." Riv's eyes went wide. Whoa, easy there, buddy. We're just trying. Biological units unrecognized. Scanning for command hierarchy." Juno's gut clenched. If it determined them as hostile, it could lock them out. Or worse, activate the ship's remaining defenses. She stepped forward, selecting her words carefully. "We're salvagers. We found you after the crash. You don't have a command structure anymore, but we can give you one." Silence. Then a flare of golden light pulsed through the nanoforge. "Processing." Juno held her breath. Riv's gauntlet flashed green. She breathed sharply. "We're in." The nanoforge core separated from the dreadnought's mainframe, its pulses dying to a gradual, steady glow. Juno reached out, her palms brushing. Across its sleek, obsidian black casing. It was warm, almost like it was alive. Tark, who had been maintaining watch near the collapsed bulkhead, gave a sharp nod. "We need to move. Now." Juno nodded, hefting the nanoforge into a reinforced containment crate. "Let's get out of here." Before they could leave, the ship lurched. A warning klaxon blared through the lifeless halls. Then, over the comms, a fresh voice. "Unidentified ground teams. This is Commander Drake Vow of the Toroyan Empire. You are intruding on Imperial property. Surrender immediately or be terminated." Juno's blood turned cold. The Empire had arrived. Outside, the sky was burning. 3 Toroyan dropships loomed above the crash site, their underbellies bristling with railguns and plasma turrets. Searchlights carved through the wreckage, sweeping for movement. Juno and her crew bolted from the ruined dreadnought, their boots crunching over shattered metal. Milo swore. How the heck did they get here that fast? Tark grit his teeth. The instant that spacecraft crashed, you think they weren't tracking it? This was a race. We just barely won. Juno flung the nanoforge crate into their waiting skiff, a hastily made hovercraft with patch thrusters and strengthened plating. Not pretty, but fast. She got in, smashing her fist against the control panel. Go! 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 The skiff's engines roared to life, kicking up a plume of dust as it shot forward. A sharp whine filled the air. Incoming plasma fire. Boom. The first blast detonated the ground just behind them, sending scrap and fire rocketing into the sky. Tark swerved. Hard. The skiff barely avoiding another searing hot plasma bolt that slammed into a rusted starship husk. Milo clutched to the edge, yelling over the wind, "We are going to perish!" Juno grabbed the mounted turret at the back of the skiff, locking onto one of the dropships. Not today! She squeezed the trigger. A barrage of kinetic rounds tore through the sky, striking the dropship's exposed ventral plating. Sparks erupted from its engines, and it veered sideways, spiraling downward before exploding against the wreckage below. Tark whooped. That's one down. Juno didn't celebrate. The other two were still in pursuit. The skiff sped for the cliffside. Pass, a short canyon leading back to their concealed scrapyard. If they could just make it. More gunfire. Juno turned just in time to see Toroyan skiffs, sleek, black, and built for pursuit, barreling toward them from the ridge. She swore under her breath. They weren't getting out of this clean. As the scrapyard loomed in the distance, Juno realized they had one shot. She looked to Riv, eyes bright. "Can you wake up Zeus?" Riv paused. "We barely grasp it. What if it turns on us?" Juno clenched her jaw. "We don't have a choice." Riv yelled out a string of curses, then placed her hands over the nanoforge core, providing a direct power link from the skiff's battery. The golden pulses strengthened, and suddenly Zeus spoke again. "New command authority confirmed." Juno took a breath. "Zeus, we need firepower." A pause, then. "Initializing weapon systems." From the scrapyard ahead, their half-built warship, the Revenant, came to life. Its cobbled-together railguns roared online, its hull-mounted cannons locked upon the advancing Toroyan skiffs. And then hellfire poured from the sky. The Revenant was never supposed to fire. Not yet. Not in its unfinished state, still half buried beneath mountains of scavenged alloy and forgotten war relics. It was a ship that had never seen the stars, never left the junk-laden abyss of Hecker 7's wastelands. And yet, as Zeus's golden pulse surged, its cobbled-together railguns began to glow, their barrels whining as they charged. From the skiff, Juno barely had time to register what was happening before hell was unleashed. A thunderous boom split the night. The Revenant's forward railgun, a monstrous fusion of scavenged Toroyan plating and human ingenuity, roared to life, hurling a kinetic round at hypersonic velocity. The projectile shattered the sky, leaving behind a shockwave that flattened the nearby scrap piles. The closest Toroyan skiff never stood a chance. One instant, it was there, sleek and black, closing in on Juno's crew with brutal precision. The following, it was atomized. The impact tore through its strengthened hull like paper, sending blazing debris hurtling into the night. Juno gripped against the skiff's rail, her pulse thumping. Holy... Tark let out a crazy chuckle. Did we just fire a boom? The Revenant shot again, this time targeting one of the dropships circling above. The railgun's slug ripped through its core thrusters, throwing it into a vicious spin before it fell into the scrapyard below, erupting in a tremendous explosion of twisted metal. Tark whooped. "Oh, I love this ship already." Milo, still grasping the side of the boat, looked pale. "Remind me to never piss off the AI." Riv didn't answer. She was still locked onto the nanoforge core, her gauntlet flashing warnings as Zeus continued to integrate itself into the Revenant's systems. Juno narrowed her eyes. This wasn't merely a pre-programmed response. Zeus wasn't following old war protocols. It was thinking, adapting, and it had picked them. Juno didn't have time to dispute it. The surviving Toroyan skiffs altered direction, banking hard to avoid the Revenant's fire line. Their sleek bodies dipped low over the scrap heaps, darting amongst rusted-out wrecks. They were hunting, and Juno's skiff was still a target. Tark veered hard to the right, nearly evading a plasma discharge that would have melted them into slag. Juno locked onto the lead skiff, clutching the mounted turret. She squeezed the trigger. A stream of high-caliber rounds tore through the darkness, slamming at the enemy's shields. Sparks flared. The skiff staggered, but it wasn't enough. The Toroians were too quick, too well armored. The homemade gun wasn't going to cut it. They needed something bigger. Juno glanced toward the Revenant, holding the comlink. "Zos, can you target the last two?" The AI's voice returned, quieter now, more sophisticated. "Affirmative. Weapon systems at 68% capacity, calculating best striking trajectory." Juno's pulse quickened. "Then fire!" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Revenant's bottom hull burst open. A pair of ionized turrets, salvaged from a wrecked Toroian battlecruiser, roared to life. Their targeting systems flashed blue as they latched upon the surviving skiffs, even abandoned mining stations that still had operating reactors. Trick studied the list. "All right, so we loot some scrap, feed it into the nanoforge, and boom, upgraded warship." He frowned. "What's the catch?" Cuss answered without hesitation. "Processing time is limited. The Toroian fleet will return in approximately 6.2 cycles. Full optimization requires additional power sources beyond existing capability." Juno breathed sharply. "And where do we find more power?" A new section of the holographic map came into focus. A Toroian outpost, deep in the wastelands. Juno narrowed her eyes. "That's a fuel depot," Zos said. "Correct. The fusion cores contained within would enhance processing speed by 182%. "Acquisition is suggested," Milo grumbled. "So, let me get this straight. We just pissed off the Empire, barely survived their first attack, and now your big idea is to go steal from them?" Juno smirked. "You got a better plan?" Silence. No one did, because in the end, the only way to survive was to fight. Juno raked a hand through her hair, gaze riveted onto the Revenant's skeleton hull. This ship, her ship, was still more trash than battle machine, but she could feel it now, beneath her feet, beneath her skin. The nanoforge was changing. It, crafting something deadlier. Zos was watching, waiting for her command. She took a breath. Then, "We hit the depot." Trick grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." Riv hesitated. "If we do this, there's no going back. The Empire won't just want us dead. They'll want this ship wiped from existence." Juno met her gaze. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance." The crew prepared. Milo rigged the skiffs for speed. Riv recalibrated the Revenant's weapons, patching together every ounce of firepower they had left. Trick sharpened his blade, whistling a low tune. And Juno. She stood in front of the nanoforge core, watching it pulse. This wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a weapon. And soon, it would be unstoppable. The Toroians thought they could bury her in scrap. They had given her the parts, and now she was going to build a warship that would burn their empire to the ground. The Revenant was alive. It wasn't the same ship that had limped out of the scrapyard weeks ago. It had been reborn. Its hull, scarred but reinforced, its weapon systems far more capable than anything Juno could have hoped for. Zos had done it. No, Zos was doing it. Day by day, moment by moment, the AI was knitting the ship together with scraps, powering it up with stolen energy, fusing their destiny with the Revenants. Juno stood in the command room, staring out. At the barren wastelands of Hiar 7, the horizon smeared with orange and purple as the twin suns began to dip behind jagged cliffs. The ship's engines hummed beneath her feet, its pulse synchronized with her own heartbeat. It was time. "We're ready," Riv said from behind her, her voice steady but sharp with an edge of anticipation. The engineer's face was smeared with grease, her hands still shaking from hours of tinkering with the ship's interface. It was clear she hadn't slept. None of them had. Juno nodded without turning. "Set course for the Toroian fuel depot." Riv hesitated just long enough for Juno to feel the tension in the air shift. The entire crew had been uneasy. They had scavenged a warship, yes, but now they were going to steal from the heart of the Toroian Empire itself. "We need the stealth." "Drive engaged," Riv said, her eyes narrowing. "And you know as well as I do that the Revenant's cloaking system is still a work in progress." "Do it!" Juno's voice was sharp. She wasn't about to back down now, not after everything they had sacrificed to get here. She turned, locking eyes with her crew. "Make it work, Riv. We can't afford failure." Riv didn't say anything more. She turned to the terminal, fingers flying across the controls. The Revenant's engines spooled up, the soft hum of energy spreading throughout the ship as the cloaking field engaged. They were going dark. The ship rumbled beneath their feet, and then silence. they were invisible. Juno glanced at Tark, who was leaning against the bulkhead, a grin playing on his lips. "This is the part where we break all the rules, right?" Juno smirked. "This is the part where we survive." The engines whined, and the Revenant slipped into the darkness of space like a predator stalking its prey. The Toroyan depot was located on a derelict station orbiting a gas giant. It wasn't heavily guarded, not yet anyway. The Toroyans didn't believe anyone would dare raid their fuel supply, so deep within their territory. The Revenant, cloaked and deadly, made its way toward the station. As they approached, the station loomed larger in the viewport. Juno found herself in the war room once more, staring at the blueprints Zos had provided them. The station itself was a massive floating fortress, its hull covered in layers of reinforced plating. Its corridors were a maze of narrow, tight angles. There were turret emplacements too, and if they triggered the wrong alarms, there was a good chance they'd be turned into space debris before they even reached the fuel depot. Trix. Fingers drummed softly on his rifle. "So, we're just going to stroll in there and take what we need?" "No problem." Riv, still perched at her station, looked up. "That's the plan, yes. We'll need to extract the core fuel cells directly from their storage base." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of nervous energy there, a sharpness she was trying to suppress. "Just make sure you disable any alarm systems." Juno turned to face the team. "We don't want them calling for reinforcements while we're in there. We'll only have minutes to get in and out." Milo, who had been silent up until now, looked over his shoulder, his eyes filled with an almost palpable fear. "And what about the Toroyans?" The question hung in the air. Juno bit back a sigh. She already knew what was coming. If we get caught, we fight. It wasn't the answer they wanted to hear, but it was the only one she could give. The back Revenant slid into the station's shadow, its cloaking systems holding firm as they drifted closer. Juno could see it now, a massive station stretching across the void. The shape was too large for a simple freighter. It was more like a fortress. Its dark exterior was crawling with unmarked ships docked around its perimeter. The Toroyans had been preparing for something. Juno just didn't know what. Riv, tapping rapidly at the control panel, snapped her fingers. "We're in. I've disabled the outer defense systems. We can board now." Juno's heart skipped a beat. "Let's go." The docking bay doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a silent, dimly lit corridor inside the station. The only sound was the quiet clack of boots on metal, echoing through the vast emptiness. They moved quickly, shadows within shadows, their weapons ready. Milo led the charge, his rifle trained on every corner, while Tark brought up the rear. Juno and Riv stayed at the center, Riv scanning for any sign of movement. They had no intention of getting caught. The closer they got to the fuel storage, the more thick the air felt, as though the station itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then they reached it. The fuel vault was massive, an entire chamber buried deep inside. The station, surrounded by thick, reinforced walls. The doors were locked, but Riv was already at the terminal, bypassing the security protocols. The fuel cells were just beyond those doors, stored in high-tech containment crates, their glowing orange power signatures visible through the reinforced glass. "We're in," Riv said, a smile creeping onto her face. But just as she turned to open the vault doors, the alarm screamed to life. The door slammed shut with a resounding clang, and the sound of heavy boots could be heard in the distance, growing louder. Riv's hands flew over the controls. "I've got it. Just a second." But it was too late. The Toroyans had found them. The walls shuddered as Toroyan soldiers poured into the hall, their plasma rifles trained on the intruders. The first shot rang out, and everything exploded into chaos. Tark was the first to fire, his rifle blazing through the corridor, cutting down the first few soldiers who dared approach. Milo's eyes were wide, but he didn't hesitate. He let off a spray of shots, taking out another soldier before ducking for cover. Juno threw herself to the side, drawing her blaster and firing in one fluid motion. A Toroyan soldier dropped to the ground, but there were too many coming at them now. "We need to move now," Juno shouted. Riv was still working on the vault. "Just give me one more minute!" Trix's voice was a roar. "We don't have that long!" The air was thick with tension. The station's cold steel felt like a tomb as the crew fought for their lives, trying to hold back the Toroyans long enough for Rivi to finish. And then, just as hope began to slip away, Riv's voice came through, barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "Got it!" The vault doors hissed open, revealing precious fuel cells. their orange glow blinding in the low light. Juno didn't wait for an order. She grabbed a cell, tossing it into the cart, then grabbed another. The crew was fighting tooth and nail, but they had one shot, one chance to get out alive. The Revenant's systems had prepared them for this. Now it was time to use it. Juno grabbed the last fuel cell, turned to the others, and shouted, "Let's go, now!" The battle for survival had just begun. The vault doors slammed shut behind them, the fuel cell secured in the makeshift cart. Juno didn't have time to think about the implications. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get the hell out of there before the Toroyans swarmed the entire station. The distant hum of approaching soldiers echoed, reverberating through the cold metallic corridors. They had barely seconds before they were surrounded. "Move!" Juno barked, taking the lead as they sprinted down the hallway. The sound of their boots pounded in perfect sync behind them. The Toroyans were closing in. Their boots echoed louder now, a unified stampede. Riv was at the back, clutching the fuel cells to her chest like they were precious cargo. And they were. "Is the cloaking still active?" Juno shouted over her shoulder. "Yes," Riv gasped, her voice strained as she ran. "But it won't hold much longer. We're too close to the enemy forces." Trick's face was set in a grim expression as he threw a grenade around a corner. Boom! The explosion sent debris flying, taking out 2 soldiers in one clean shot. But they were only getting started. More were coming. "Keep going," Juno commanded, rounding another corner. The metal walls seemed to close in as they sprinted through the narrow corridors. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, a tightness in her throat that wouldn't relent. They were almost at the docking bay. Riv glanced down at her gauntlet, eyes flashing with concern. "The cloaking field is weakening. We won't make it without being detected." "Then we fight," Juno replied, gritting her teeth. "We won't let them take us alive." They burst into the docking bay, the Revenant waiting for them in the distance, its engines primed and ready to launch. Tark and Milo took up positions, covering their retreat. Shots rang out from the Toroyans, forcing them to duck and scramble. For cover! Then the worst happened. The cloaking field flickered out, a momentary flash of light before it collapsed. They were exposed. "Damn it!" Riv cursed under her breath, slamming her hand on the console to initiate the docking sequence. Juno didn't wait for the ship to be fully docked. She was already running, her pulse raging. "Get on board! Now!" The Toroyan fire intensified as they approached, but they made it. The airlock closed just as a barrage of plasma fire shattered the space where they had stood only seconds ago. The Revenant was launched into the void with a screech of its engines, the battle now behind them, but not over. They were alive, but the real fight had only just begun. The Revenant was flying dark, making its way back toward the outer edges of the system where they could lay low. Juno stood on the bridge, staring at the dark expanse of space beyond. The glass. The stars twinkled distantly, indifferent to the chaos they had just survived. But the fight wasn't over, and Juno knew that. "Status report," she called out, turning to Riv, who was sitting at the control panel, fingers working at a pace that looked frantic. Riv didn't look up. "The cloaking field's damaged. I can't restore full functionality until we get back to Here 7 for repairs. It's going to be a few days." Tark was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "How long until the Toroyans catch up?" Juno's eyes flickered to the tactical display. The Toroyan fleet had to have been notified by now. Even with their stolen fuel, they couldn't hide for long. "About 2 days," she replied, tension lining her voice. "We need to prepare for their retaliation. We have no choice but to strike first." Riv finally looked up, her face tight with worry. "You know the stakes. If we attack them, there's no turning back. We're going to be marked for death." Juno met her gaze. "We're already marked. The only difference now is that we'll fight back." She turned to the others. "Rest for the night. Tomorrow, we strategize. This time, we take the fight to them." There was no hesitation in her voice, no trace of doubt. The Revenant was the last of its kind, and they were the only ones who could bring down the Toroyan Empire, no matter the cost. The crew sat in the dimly lit war room, the map of the Toroyan territories spread out on the table before them. Juno felt the weight of their mission settling in. Every decision now would either lead to victory or death. "We've hit them where it hurts," Milo said, tapping a finger on the map, tracing their route to the heart of the Toroyan fleet. "Their fuel supply is compromised. We just need to keep hitting them, force them to spread their forces thin." Riv looked up from her console, her eyes filled with concern. We can't just keep attacking their supply lines. We'll need intel on their command structure, their fleets. Juno nodded. We need to infiltrate their stronghold, hit their intel networks, and get the coordinates for their fleet. Once we know where they are, we'll strike. Trick stood up, cracking his neck. We'll need to move fast. If they're spreading their forces thin, now's our chance. But we won't have a second chance if we fail, Juno replied, her voice low. She turned to Riv, whose fingers were already flying over the console. Patch me into their comms. I'll find us a way in. Riv nodded. Give me a second. The room fell into a tense silence as the systems hummed, the screens lighting up with data. Finally, Riv smirked. Got it. We've got access to their low-level command feeds. We can track their movements, look for weak points. Juno exhaled, her gaze turning to the map. It's time to hit them where it counts. They were about to embark on a new chapter in their war, one where the Toroyans wouldn't see them coming. The Revenant moved silently through the black, cloaked once again. They had found a weak spot in the Toroyan command, an underutilized base hidden in the asteroid fields near the Outer Rim. It was their perfect chance to gather intel, to find the coordinates for the fleet, and to cause as much damage as possible. We're close, Juno said, her voice barely above a whisper. We've got about 5 minutes until we hit the base, Tark added. How are we getting in? We'll infiltrate through their hangar bay, Juno said, pointing to the tactical map. The base has minimal security right now. We'll split up once we're inside. Milo and Trick, you'll deal with the guards. Riv, you and I will access the comms room. The team nodded, their faces set with grim determination. There was no room for failure. They landed in the hangar bay without a sound, slipping past the unguarded entrances and moving quickly through the base. The walls were cold and sterile, but the crew's nerves were anything but. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the Toroyan war machine, and every moment carried the potential for disaster. Once inside, the plan unfolded as expected. Trick and Milo engaged the guards, taking them out with swift, brutal precision. Juno and Riv made their way to the comms room, their steps muffled by the low hum of the base's systems. Riv worked the terminal, her fingers dancing across the keys as the screen flickered to life. I'm in. We've got access to their fleet data. Juno took a breath, watching the map appear on the screen. This is it. Let's make it count. They downloaded the coordinates, the Toroyan fleet's current position, and sent a virus to scramble their comms, ensuring that any message they tried to send out would be disrupted. Done, Riv said, a sly smile creeping onto her face. Let's go. But as they turned to leave, the base went silent. The alarms rang out, signaling the arrival of reinforcements. They were trapped. The base went into lockdown, doors slamming shut, cutting off their escape routes. The alarms screamed in their ears. We've got company, Trick shouted, his gun blazing as he held the line. Milo was already moving, setting up a perimeter, but it was clear the Toroyans had figured out their plan. They were surrounded. Juno's eyes locked onto Riv's. We need to move. Now. The ship was their only chance. But the soldiers kept coming, more than Juno had anticipated. And they were getting closer. We don't have the time, Riv said, clutching the virus data. We need to fight, Juno nodded. The only option was to push through. Tark was already at the front, taking out soldier after soldier, but it was clear they needed a way out. Fast. Juno turned to Milo. You and Tark cover us. Riv, get us to the hangar. Now. As they rushed toward the hangar, the Toroyans closing in, Juno realized they didn't have much time. If they didn't escape soon, they wouldn't make it out alive. The Revenant shot out of the station's hangar, the engines screaming as the crew fought to keep the ship together. The Toroyans were hot on their tail now, battle cruisers in pursuit, their weapons charging. This was it, the final test. Juno gritted her teeth, adrenaline surging through her veins. All systems, brace for impact. The battle had begun. They were going to win or die trying. Hey everyone! If you enjoy these epic HFY stories, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and drop a comment below to let us know your favorite part or what stories you'd love to hear next. Your support keeps the channel growing and the stories coming. Thanks for being part of this channel.